right, so guys, we're so excited today that we have a very, very VIP, and we have Bin Gu, who is a law professor from the Beijing Foreign University in Beijing, one of the most famous universities in China. Professor Gu, I want to say thank you so much for coming onto our channel.
Good to see you. Thank you very much.
Yes, and so look, I just want to say how much of an honor it is to have you here today. We know you are extremely busy, and you're making time for us, and to come on our TikTok channel is absolutely amazing. So I'd like to ask you a few questions today, if that's okay. And look, a lot of my users have come about asking me to talk with you about these topics. So the first question I have is, like, in your view, does the recent trade agreement present a long-term solution or more of a temporary compromise? Because you know the deal with the US and China it happened like a band-aid very quickly. So do you think this is something that is long-term, or just a band-aid quick patch?
Well, thank you very much. That's a very important topic. It happened like 12 days ago, I guess, in Geneva. We call it Geneva meeting. If you read the joint statement carefully, I think it has both features of temporal compromise and long-term, the right way to long-term solution. First, I think both countries agreed to decrease the tariff by 115 percentage points. And basically, US will keep like a 30% tariff on China, and China will impose like a 10% tariff for US goods since this year, right? So another 24% tariff will be temporarily suspended for 90 days. So clearly, this is a temporal compromise. But meanwhile, I think the joint statement also stimulated there will be a kind of working mechanism for further trade and economic talks. So this is the right way to long-term solution. So that's my understanding about the joint statement.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And so, like, another question that I've been asked is, like, what do you think are the key factors that could either strengthen or break the current trade deal?
And that's a very good question. I think the key factors that strengthen the current trade deal fundamentally is determined by the U.S. economic performance. Why the U.S. decides to come to the table in the first place in the Geneva meeting, because of the domestic economic problems. So I think basically, if we break down, there are two issues. First, we should ask, is Trump losing his base because of inflation or high consumer price? The second question is about the finance. Are investors losing confidence in U.S. Treasury bonds, right? So this is one is about the Trump's base. The other is about the capital markets. Recently, you may notice that Moody, one of the three major credit rating agencies, has downloaded U.S. credit ratings. So the three major international credit agencies all downloaded U.S. credit rating. There will be no more AAA credit rating for USA. So that's a big problem for the U.S. so-called sound U.S. dollars, right? So that's the fundamental issue. That's the two major the fundamental issue that push the U.S. to the negotiated table. Another major factor is about the negotiation itself. The two sides negotiators come together, and whether or not they will reach out, they will reach a further or more win-win results. It also depends on each other's mentality. Whether they come here in kind of mutual respect mentality, or whether they come here from a strength of a position of strength. So we'll decide whether the result will become a win-win situation or whether there is kind of a zero-sum game. So I read the joint statement carefully. The preamble of the joint statement says the two sides will adhere to kind of spirit of mutual respect and mutual opening. That's the key. And that will decide whether in future they will have further, more exciting positive result will come between China and US.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Look, that leads me to my next question, Professor, which is what are some areas where the US and China could still find mutual benefit despite ongoing tensions? Because as you know, the tensions are still there, but there's got to be areas where these two great like nations can have mutual benefit. Where do you think that actually is?
I think number one issue is about the economy. They will find a mutual common ground on economy. So China is transforming. Basically, China is transforming towards a kind of domestic demand-driven growth model. This is very important. I'd like to emphasize on this. So kind of a domestic-driven economy rather than export-led economy means a lot of things for the world as well as for China itself. It means more and more open and wide market opportunities for world products and world investments, including those from the US. For example, the opening up of service sectors are promising for the US companies because US companies have the edge over service sectors compared with the others. I think I'd like to point out the financial market opening up. In recent years, although with the tensions between the U.S. China, and China keeps opening up its financial sectors. This includes wealth management, includes credit rating, like we just mentioned, Moody's and Fitch. They come here, they can operate in Chinese market, and also derivatives. China's derivative market is also developing. Those are kind of China's new developments, opening up its markets and driven its domestic economy. But on the other side, I think the U.S. should also open up its market for the Chinese investment and products like electronic vehicles. The U.S. tax sections on the Chinese persons and enterprises should also be lifted in reciprocity in Trump's words. So that's the potential economic cooperative area the two sides should work on. But also there are some other areas like including fentanyl, the disputes over fentanyl. They can solve the problem in kind of joint together. We heard some news from the Geneva meeting 12 days ago. They had some talk on this problem. Also including the geopolitical tensions. China, US, and join together, they can help to solve the Russia-Ukraine conflict, India and Palestine, or Israel issues. I think there are a lot of potential areas. Yeah.
Thank you. And
yes,
look,
David, back to you.
Yeah, my next question is connected to Trump himself, and this is a kind of difficult time to deal with a politician like him because in the world we have politicians and countries that have structure, like China has such long-term structure and long-term plans, and a lot of countries have long-term plans and long-term structure, but then you have a leader like Trump who is absolutely emotional and random, and you never know, and you can never predict someone like him and his next move, the way he attacked his own university, Harvard, and all of this internal dilemma in the US. How can China deal with someone like him? China being a country that has such a long-term structured plan, how do they deal with a leader who is so random and not as structured? How do you think that would work in China's policy?
Definitely, thank you. That's you touched the essence of the the world's attention these days. Trump's policy of uncertainty caused a lot of attention around the world. Everybody is worried. I think in a simple word, I can say China is using its policy of certainty to address Trump's policy of uncertainty. As I mentioned, first, China just advocates or promote this kind of dual circulation. It means that it not only trade with the world, it also needs to develop its own domestic market. That's very important. And since the last September, China used a lot of trade policy instruments like physical, monetary, industrial policies to develop its own domestic market, rather than a kind of depending on the U.S. market. So I think that's a very important step China is taking, and it's also this can create certainty for itself and for the world trade. Second one is about I think externally, China promotes multilateralism and free trade. China was to join hands with the European Union or those countries who in their blood support multilateralism to promote this kind of a greater regional trade and investment flow to mitigate the effects of U.S. Trump tariffs. So that's basically I think internally and externally, China try to stabilize the world system as well as stabilize its economic growth.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you.
David, thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, China in another question has BRICS. Now, the BRICS is taking the world by storm, and it's also posing, let's say, challenges for the world, because the world's become two-sided suddenly. Suddenly people are like, okay, you're either with the US or you're with BRICS. I mean, this is the next topic that I want to talk to you about, which is like, do you think BRICS could pose a serious challenge for the current US-led financial system? Because this is a question that's been asked to me several times, and I'm very looking forward to your answer, Professor.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a very important question. I think who is threatening the US-led financial system? Definitely it's not the BRICS, it's not China, it's the US itself. So that's my first point. A major threat to US dollar as world currency is US, the irresponsible spending habits or spending tradition. There is famous data, it's called cherry interest payment. Like last year reaches like $900 billion, almost $1 trillion, surpasses US military expenditure last year. So the problem is with US spending habits. That is definitely a huge problem, and that's the biggest threat to US-led financial system. Furthermore, the US used or threatened to use financial sanctions over like China, Russia, Iran, and many others, forces those international players to deflect away from the dollar-centered global currency system. Right. So last year at the Kansas BRICS summit meeting, I think Russia initiated a lot of alternative financial arrangements like BRICS payment, BRICS clear, BRICS bridge. Unfortunately, those kind of initiatives haven't achieved much substantial progress, but you definitely see a kind of a deflection from US endeavor to deflect from US-led financial system. Another point I want to mention is about the global governance. The traditional world order is led by the US definitely, and the G20 is a centerpiece. But these days, the global governance pivots itself to regional governance, as you said, BRICS, and there is another mechanism called the ASEAN Plus 3. 10 ASEAN countries, Southeast Asian countries, plus China, South Korea, and Japan. they also have very close cooperative mechanism. Those two, I think, are representative of such kind of regional governance. And in G20, consensus is very hard to build these days. Instead of issue a kind of joint statement after each G20 meeting, nowadays they issue the kind of a chair summary. It means no consensus among them. Only chairs issue the summary. So it has become kind of a new norm these days. But meanwhile, the kind of regional governance represented by BRICS or ASEAN +3 has achieved some substantial progress. Like in the kind of what we call it Chiangmai Initiative, multilateralism. I think last month, if you know, last month they included RMB, renminbi, and Japanese yuan as the kind of a dollar of choice, as kind of a currency of choice in capital subscription on top of US. So that's basically my answer about who is challenging US-led financial system.
What was the last thing you said? What replaced that last part? Could you elaborate on that last part you just mentioned? It was, you said, what was that?
A new mechanism called Chiangmai. It's basically kind of a currency swap system to address address liquidity problems facing the Southeast Asian countries. It was initiated after the 1997 Asia financial crisis, a long time ago.
Yes.
So this group of Asia countries decided to form kind of cooperative efforts to address their regional liquidity problem. Yes, and this CMIM mechanism has achieved some new progress. I guess last month. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Look, the next question is more about the AIIB. So the Chinese-led AIIB has been significantly growing over the last few years. Can you tell us a little bit about its achievements? How has it filled in holes left by Western counterparts? That is something that probably a lot of countries want to know, because it has been filling gaps and filling the blanks. And not a lot of people firstly know even what is the AIIB. And if you could introduce that and then go into answering the question about how it's grown recently, its achievements, and also how it's filled in the gaps.
I'm very happy to address this question, because I have been following AIIB for like 10 years. That's the very beginning, 10 years ago. This year is a big year for AIIB. It's 10th anniversary next month. So it will be held in Beijing. I encourage your followers to follow the issue. Why? Because AIIB is truly important, because it represents China's approach towards global economic governance. Well, first, let me lay out the background, the kind of simple introduction about AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. It's the first multilateral development bank initiated and led by China since 10 years ago. Now it has over 110 members, mostly sovereign nations, but it also includes China, Hong Kong, this kind of we call it separate customs territory. So it's supported by 110 members. And the AIIB is not only a club of global South. Most of them are developing countries or least developing countries, but it is also a hub connecting the global South and global North. Because in this hub, all G7 countries, save the US and Japan, are also in. They play a very important part in AIIB. So it's truly global bank, although in its name it bears a kind of Asia, but it's truly global. AIB has adhered to a spirit of heritage and innovation. We have this kind of term called heritage and innovation during its past 10-year operation. Why I say it's kind of heritage? Because it's a strong governance and vigorous operations standards are derived from the Bretton Woods institutions. It inherits a lot of good standards and governance systems from the World Bank, IMF. But meanwhile, AIB also has its own feature, its own innovation elements. For example, its governance is more agile rather than rigid. Its project design and implementation fits local needs and suits the changing circumstances and more responsive. As AIB President Jing Liqun said, it's kind of lean, clean, green. So it's very agile. It successfully avoids the stigma of the World Bank, so-called one size fits all. That's a problem, and sometimes they are welcomed by developing world. So I think that's basically the status quo of AIB. Thank you for mentioning this question.
Sure, no problem. Look, moving on, Professor, I have a question about the US has been attacking other Chinese-led initiatives like BRI for so-called debt trap diplomacy. You know, I've heard a lot of ridiculous things about this, and especially Trump going after the BRI, right? So what's your response to that when the US is saying that the debt trap diplomacy is, you know, a thing? How would you respond to something like that? And US's attack on China like that? How would you, as a professor, your opinion on that?
Yeah. Both AIB is kind of an independent international organization. BI, Belt and Road, is kind of a China-led international economic initiative. These two mechanisms are very important. Some compare those two mechanisms as kind of dual engine plane. One engine is AIB, the other engine is Belt and Road. Both mechanisms focus on infrastructure building. Why China pick up this area for international cooperation? Because China's own development experience starts with the infrastructure building, and China wants to share this successful story with the world. That's why we come up with the BRI, we come up with the idea of AIB. So actually, as you said, Trump criticized BRI, but actually most of the G7 countries joined the BRI through the so-called third-party market cooperation. And I believe the US should also participate in BRI and develop its own outdated infrastructure. For example, it can introduce China's high-speed railway, right? It's also good for but BI, meanwhile, BI emphasizes our high quality. We call it green BI, clean BI, zero tolerance for corruption, and debt sustainability is also very important. You mentioned the debt trap diplomacy. Well, China addressed the debt issue very seriously. For example, so far there have been three BRI summits held in Beijing. During the second and third summit, China issued debt sustainability framework for both low-income countries and for market access countries. So basically, it means two groups of countries. One is low income, and the other is middle income countries. All BRI countries are covered by the debt sustainability framework to address the debt issue. I think you are stuck there. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, it's fine.
David, good, great. So I want to give you an example. if you break down the debt structure of some Belt and Road countries, you will see the debt from China just occupy a very low percentage of that country's total debt portfolio. For example, Sri Lanka. This is a country often mentioned by Western media, criticizing the so-called debt trap diplomacy. Only 10% of Sri Lanka's foreign debt is from China. Most of Sri Lanka's foreign debt is from international financial institutions, the World Bank, IMF, and from international capital market investors. So, if that said, China addresses the debt of the BRI countries very seriously. It has been actively participating and cooperative in joining international efforts in addressing the debt issue, including during the pandemic, COVID time. China and the other G20 countries together, they cooperated under a framework called the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, called DSSI, and also another one called a Common Framework for Debt Treatment beyond DSSI. So China actually very responsive to this kind of hot issue, the debt issue. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that, because you know, that is, look, just I want to reflect on that last question a little bit, because that, you know, when BRICS BRICS is developing, AIIB is developing, people are now looking at the One Belt Road Initiative and looking at this and saying, well, China is trapping countries in debt in order to, well, you know, there's a lot that could be said, because, I mean, you could look at the US as well as invading countries in order to take resources. I mean, it's a very, China always takes the peaceful path in order to do dealings with other countries. And this is something that that's why I asked you that previous question, because that's a really good answer you've given us. And it gives us so much more transparency into how China deals with these so-called debt traps, you know. And it's very, very
clear. Yeah, you made a very good comparison. Yeah, you made a very good comparison. Yeah. China. Yeah.
You think about it. China takes one path to deal with other countries. Then you have the US taking another path. Both are very different and achieve very different goals and ambitions. And that's one of the questions I had for you. So thank you for answering that. That's our followers would love to hear that. Look, the next question is a little bit more about reform. Now, what is a reform agenda that China hopes to take to international financial and development institutions?
Great. So what China wants, simply put, China wants to increase shares for dynamic economies in line with their relative positions in the world economy. This is a quote from G20 statement. Yeah. So, I mean, this is not only China's own agenda, but also shared by the world. So this wording has appeared in G20 documents for many times, very consistently, and China pushing for the increasing shares for, what does it mean by dynamic economies? It can actually mean the BRICS, emerging economies, developing countries, vis-a-vis the developed world. Yeah.
All right.
Yes. And also, yes, David, but that's the vision. That's the aspiration to increase shares of dynamic economies. How to do it? How to make it happen? China basically walk on two legs. It means has two approaches. One leg is to reform the traditional institutions, like World Bank and IMF or Bretton Woods institutions. For example, China has made some progress together with other emerging economies. In 2016, that is 8 years ago, for the first time, 4 BRIC countries, save South Africa, and become top 10 shareholders in the IMF. That's a big achievement. And in the same year, Chinese renminbi, Chinese RMB joined the SDR bucket. SDR means special drawing rights under the IMF, right? So this is a milestone for the reform of the traditional institutions. The other leg when I say walk on two legs, the other leg is it means China initiated new institutions, as we talked about Belt Road, AIB, New Development Bank, and another new one is called the MCDF, Multilateral Cooperation Center for Development Finance. It has a secretariat with the IIB, so it's a new trend.
Okay.
Yes, David.
Thank you. That's a good analogy. It's a good explanation. And I guess my next question comes as what's China's vision for multilateralism? And where does other countries fit into that? Because the China's growth is so quick and so fast. So how do they how are they going to work with other countries?
Thank you. Multilateralism is definitely key pillar of the supporting global governance. As kind of academic, I coined a term called Chinese multilateralism. Actually, it means maybe Chinese style multilateralism to describe China's approach towards multilateralism and global governance, as opposed to American style multilateralism. I think the Chinese multilateralism and the American multilateralism is kind of still features a relationship of heritage and innovation. For example, through AIIB, China will reinforce the US-led world order. This argument made by US banker Robert Zoellick in a Financial Times piece. But meanwhile, China is not a hegemon in Chinese multilateralism, as opposed to the US hegemonic position in American multilateralism. Well, so I think the key here is whether the leader, as a leader, China will be a hegemon or not. My definition of a hegemon is kind of two parts. First, you need to be great power. You need to have a lot of resources. Second, as a power, you impose your will upon others. China is definitely a power, but China has no will to impose its will upon others. There is a deep historical and cultural reason behind this. Well, U.S. is kind of a Christian world. There is a saying in Christian called "You shall have no other gods before me." You have no other gods before me. In contrast, in Confucius' world, we Chinese say, if people from afar do not submit, you can track them by virtues rather than by power, rather than by conquest. So that's two different mindsets. So I say China will not be a hegemon, even if someday it becomes number one, because it has no will to impose its will upon others. As for your second question about the other countries' position in how does other country fit into this kind of Chinese multilateralism? Well, you remind me kind of the golden rule of the Belt Road Initiative, and summarized by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. It says the golden rule is broad consultation, joint contribution, and shared benefits. Well, it's kind of word by word translation from Chinese. Basically, it means let's develop together by dialogue, by communication, by coordination. So that's really very important to understand China's mindset, China's vision for multilateralism. David, thank you.
Thank you, Professor. That was that's such a good analogy and a good example of the Confucianism and traditional Christian methodologies with what you just said. I have never thought of it that way. And you're such a deep thinker, and I think today I'm going to go back and have a lot to think about after this interview. Look, I have another question about China's future, because look, let's be frank. China is developing so fast, even after COVID. I mean, COVID hit the world, and then everyone kind of struggled, and then China just picked up, right? And we can't keep up with what's going on in China. I mean, my followers alone are always super interested in China in the future. What's China going to be like? What are they going to do in the next 5 to 10 years in regards to everything? Policy, technology. A lot of people are so curious. I've never seen an audience so hungry for information, especially regarding China itself. So my next question is, right, what position do you think China hopes to hold in the world over the next 5 to 10 years?
Thank you. This is a very forward-looking question. I think in next 10 years, within a decade, many institutions like Goldman Sachs, like McKinsey, including DeepSeek, also predict China will be number one in terms of its GDP, in terms of its market size. So even if that day of China's number one come, China, I believe it's, as I said, it will never be a hegemon. So if your audience or your followers are interested, I might like to recommend myself my own op-ed writing in Straits Times, like 5 years ago. In Straits Times is a top newspaper in Singapore. It's entitled China, the US, and what it means to be a hegemon. So I said China will not what China does not want to be a hegemon. Then what it wants to be. I think here we need to distinguish two very important mindsets, and they are worth comparing. First, China. Some say China is to replace US. The second mindset is China seeks wants to rejuvenate itself. That's two very different topics. People often confuse the two. Well, the choice between two mindsets is very consequential. Because if you believe China is to replace US, I believe confrontation is unavoidable. And even war is destined. So this is kind of zero-sum game. If you believe, but if you believe China is only to rejuvenate itself, historically China has been a kind of a very great power in most of human civilization. Then both sides can be sober. US, China can be sober when potential conflicts arise. And relationship is manageable, and even a win-win outcome is in prospect. So here, I want to emphasize two different mindsets, whether China is to replace US or whether China is only to improve itself. That's two very different important mindsets. I think that's educational both for China and for Chinese people and for the world. So that's basically my answer. Yes.
Thank you, Professor. I want to extend your last point to that, what you just said. You mentioned,
yes.
Because from what you mentioned, it's very interesting because when you say replace, right, I believe what users and what people on the internet and the world, what they want to see is the world. They don't know whether the world can balance two superpowers or whether there's going to be a hierarchy and one on top and then the US here or you see what I'm saying? So you're trying to say is that China is developing itself internally, growing peacefully as it is. It doesn't have the intention of racing and replacing. Is that what you're saying? Like it's basically in the process of rejuvenation and world peace. Professor, is that the point you were making just then because this point's very important.
Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly. It's kind of I said it's kind of very important mindset. With this mindset has very huge implications. When you have the right mindset and you have the right method to deal with the potential conflicts, and the right method will help you to both sides to be sober when potential conflicts arise. And there are definitely a lot of conflicts between the two countries, right? So that's why we say we started from the Geneva meeting 12 days ago, which was very successful. That's a good example of two super minds coming together to reach a kind of very exciting positive outcome. Yeah.
That's true. Thank you, Professor. Now, I know you're stuck on time, but I do have one last question. If we if we look ahead 10 years, what areas do you think China is aiming to lead globally, economically, technologically, or diplomatically? Because look, the thing is you can't avoid development and you can't avoid dominance because as such a big country like China and it's growing just so fast. In Australia, we say so bloody fast. We I'd like to know, if we do look ahead, where do you think is China going to lead in these different areas? Could you help us and give us a bit of a window? We're all very curious to know how this is going to play out, Professor.
Great. I will be happy to share my view on this. I think if you want to know where China is heading in a decade, I strongly encourage your followers to read the Communist Party's CPC's long-term strategy plan. It's available online, and the Chinese people are taking the kind of strategic plan very seriously. They're determined to implement it. Well, the vision of the CPC is composed of two steps, basically. Like in a decade, 10 years away, China will basically realize modernization. 25 years away, that will be 2050. China will be a kind of great modern country, economically, technologically, and diplomatically, on all fronts, actually. So let me elaborate a little bit. So economically, actually, China, if you measure China's GDP by power purchase purchasing power parity, PPP, well, China has surpassed US like more than 10 years ago, and China will surpass US within a decade in terms of nominal GDP. So that's economic. Technologically, I think China and US are quite close with each other, if not on par, in terms of AI development, right? And China is actually ahead of the US in terms of renewable energy, like in electronic vehicles, in batteries, in solar panels. And China is also very good at power transmission and storage. I think, yes, that's the kind of a basic, the future competition area. And diplomatically, I would say if President Trump keeps coercing world leaders, kicking his ass, right? He's sure to see those leaders to come to China, right? For example, I give you two most recent examples. China, the ASEAN plus 3, as I said before, ASEAN, 10 ASEAN countries, and South China, Japan, South Korea, financial ministers, central bankers. They have met early in this month in Milano, Italy. Amid the threat of Trump tariffs, they agreed to cooperate together. They agreed to promote greater intra-regional trade and investment flows. And just this week, China-ASEAN trade ministers successfully concluded the negotiation of the upgrade of their free trade agreements, right? So that's the diplomatic, very important diplomatic success for China. And the last point, you mentioned about the Harvard issue recently. I think not only China will lead in economy, in technology, in diplomacy, but also educationally and culturally. Why? Trump revoked Harvard's ability. I graduated from Harvard like more than 10 years ago. So it's pretty, I feel very sympathetic of my university. Trump revoked Harvard's ability to enroll international students and scholars. And this sabotages U.S. Leadership in world education, and it definitely is closing the gap between U.S. and China in terms of education culture. Yeah.
Professor, you graduated from Harvard 10 years ago, right? So
Yeah, over 10 years ago.
So you know he tried to provoke like Harvard's very smart in that sense. Just because you mentioned that, I wanted to mention because he tried to block international students from entering Harvard. However, a court ruled against Trump. So I mean, I've never seen a country have such a debacle internally in regards to the president having this emotional, we have to call him an emotional baby for me because I feel like he's like a newborn child. He doesn't have any structure. One moment he feels like doing something, another moment he's doing another thing. He's attacking his most prestigious school and losing. It's such a big, in China, you call it dulian, is a lose face, right? I mean, it's incredible. And this is why a lot of followers are now looking at China as a way forward because China doesn't do anything like that. China doesn't go and attack Beijing University and Tsinghua University and the University of the foreign, they don't do that. And so people are looking at China as the alternative, safe alternative. And you just mentioned if Trump continues to kick ass, people are going to start turning their way to China. It's already happening. It's definitely already happening.
Yes,
Right?
yes. So it's kind of basically you pinpoint the problem that is Trump is basically confrontational both externally and internally. That's a total in contrast with China's mindset, right? Cooperative, harmonious, Confucius way. Yeah.
Well, Professor, you've been so great. Look, I have to say thank you so much for being here today, and thanks for organizing the dialogue by Beijing Club. I want to say thank you to Beijing Club so much for organizing this wonderful interview. And yeah, look, Professor, if I could just have a one note. In our interviews, we always like at the end, do you have anything you wish to say yourself personally in regards to what we spoke about today? Is there anything that stuck with you? Is there a message you want to tell people that people could then look at and then remember? Do you have anything like that?
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me. I think for the I asked before this recording, I asked you about your audience, the background to audience, mostly from the English-speaking countries.
Correct.
I encourage your followers, your friends, those friends to come to China to see what's happening here, right? So like one decade ago, I went to the US, I went to Switzerland to have my own experience. I used to hitchhike like thousands of miles across the US. I know the US, the grassroots there. I think I have my deep love to the US people, and I hope US, the West world friends can come to China more and more, right? To have this mutual dialogue and cooperation, the world will be better. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor. And thank you, everyone, for being here. That's been a great time. And guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.